Hi, so I'm 46 female, and 3 years ago I got married to my husband Hank, 48 male. Hank is my second husband. My first husband unfortunately passed away 12 years ago. He was a wonderful man and my childhood sweetheart. We started dating when we were in middle school before we even knew what our relationship was supposed to be like. But before we knew it, we were getting married because it was the only thing that we had ever wanted. He and I were soulmates, and he will always be my first love. Nothing will ever change that. We also have a daughter together, Annie, 24, female, and she has been my biggest source of love and support after my husband passed away. He was diagnosed with lung cancer when Annie was 8 years old, and after a really long and hard battle with his disease, he finally succumbed, and I was actually happy to let him go. It hurt that he had to go so soon, but I was relieved that he was no longer in pain anymore. I still miss him occasionally, but life has been kind to me, and I can't complain about anything because I really think that life has always found a way. After her father's passing, Annie and I were there for each other. We helped each other grieve, and her presence comforted me in a way that nothing else could. Honestly, in a lot of ways, she was exactly like her father, and I guess I found comfort in the fact that in one way or the other, he would always be around. I can't even talk about this without tearing up a little, so I'll move on to something a little less emotional. Coming to my husband, Hank and I met at a friend's party a couple of years ago. The one who approached me, and we hit it off instantly. We kept chatting throughout the duration of the party, and we discovered that he and I get along like a house on fire. At the end of the party, we exchanged numbers and we stayed in touch. We started texting, and he was flirting with me like nobody's business. Within a couple of weeks, he had asked me out, and I said yes. I had gone out with a couple of men after my husband had passed away, but I never really felt anything for them. It was only because everybody in my family insisted that I try to move on, because Annie had grown up and she had her own life now. I didn't have an issue with that, and I was glad that Annie had moved out and was making a life of her own. But I also didn't have a problem with being by myself and living alone. I guess my family was just trying to look out for me, and that's why they kept setting me up on dates. Unfortunately, I was never able to connect with any of the men as I had connected with my husband, and he had set the bar really high for me. So I did go out on dates and had a couple of flings here and there, but it never went past that or became anything serious. However, with Hank, it was not like that. Right from the first date, he had made it very clear to me that he wanted something serious. We were both in our 40s and had been married before with kids, but the kids were grown up and our partners were no longer in our lives. My husband had passed away, but his ex-wife had cheated on him and left him when his daughter, Fran, 26 female, was 13. He had a younger son as well, and the divorce had been really tough on their family, but they had gone through it somehow. He had stayed away from serious relationships for a long time after that because he wanted to fully devote himself to being a good father, because he was the only parent that his kids had since their mother had given up her parental rights. But now both his kids were adults, and he was ready to settle down and live for himself. I appreciated his honesty on the first date, and I guess that's what really drew me to him. He was honest, easygoing, really funny. He was very different from my late husband, but I liked him, and for the first time after my husband passed away, I felt like I could connect with the man again. I had fallen head over heels in love with him within a year, and he moved in with me soon after I confessed. After dating for a couple of years, maybe 2 years, he and I got married 3 years ago. It's been smooth sailing since then, and I have had no complaints. He's a great guy, and I love him. He also respects the fact that I have been married before, and unlike him, I never fell out of love with my late husband, but we just had to part ways because of unforeseen circumstances. He never had an issue with me speaking fondly about my memories with my late husband, and would even be interested when I would talk about him, which I thought was really nice of him. He never made it a big deal or made me feel awkward or uncomfortable about it, which a couple of men before him had done, and I really appreciated that about him. Overall, he was just a really stand-up guy, and I was happy with him. Only recently did we hit a snag and have been having problems ever since then because of an incident that happened with Fran. And we haven't even been speaking to each other after our last fight because it was just that bad. And things have never been like this before, so I don't know what to do now. It all started a couple of weeks ago when Fran announced that she and her boyfriend were engaged. I was really happy for her because I knew that Fran and her boyfriend had been together for a long time. I think they had been together since high school, and I thought that it was really cute. I had even mentioned that it reminded me of myself and had congratulated them and even gave them some lovely gifts at their engagement party. Fran and I have always had a civil and formal relationship. I would not say that we are close because I met her when she was an adult already. So, of course, we don't have the typical stepmom-stepdaughter relationship. We are not close friends because of the age gap and also because I think Fran is quite closed off personally. She never opened up to me, and even though she was always nice to me, we were never really able to connect on a personal level. But I don't mind it. Some people are just naturally quiet and shy, and it takes them a while to open up. I was hopeful that a couple of years later she would treat me like family. It hasn't happened yet, but I was hopeful, but now I'm quite doubtful that it might change in the future because of what is happening right now. So a couple of days after the engagement party, Fran came to visit me on the weekend. I was at home, but Hank was out with a couple of his friends. Usually whenever Fran visits us, it is to talk to her dad. So when she called me that day to ask if I was at home, I told her that her dad was out, but she told me that it was fine because I was the one that she wanted to talk to. Instantly, I knew that there was something weird going on. Whenever Fran and I had been left alone in a room before this, there had always been an awkward silence until Hank came home. She never had anything to say to me, and even if I tried to make conversations with her, it would lead nowhere. She never seemed to be very talkative around me. So that day, when she said that she wanted to talk to me, I could tell that something was off about this. But I still invited her to come over because I thought that she was going to try and build a relationship with me or something. And I wanted to be open to it because even though we are not close, I happen to quite really like Fran as a person, and I would have loved to get to know her better. So I invited her over, and strangely enough, she was acting like a totally different person that day. It was really off-putting, but I didn't address it. She hugged me and was very sweet when she showed up at my house. For the record, Fran barely ever even hugs her own father because she doesn't really enjoy hugs. So that was extremely weird, but I didn't say anything about it, and we sat down on the couch and made small talk for a while. She kept asking me questions about my life and seemed very interested in my late husband and our marriage. She also kept asking me questions about my wedding and stuff, and I won't lie, I thought that we were making progress and becoming friends. She seemed genuinely interested, and so I kept talking to her. And after about an hour, she finally stopped beating around the bush and came to the point. She told me that she was actually here to ask me for something. So I told her to go ahead, expecting it to be something small, but instead, she told me that she was actually here to ask me if she could use my wedding jewelry on her big day. Now, I wouldn't have had a problem with it under other circumstances, but my wedding jewelry is personal to me. And I had been hoping that my daughter would be the first to wear it for her wedding day or whatever occasion she wanted to wear it on after me. I had wanted Annie to be the first to have my jewelry, and I didn't want it to be any other way, so I had to let Fran down and tell her that I couldn't let her have that. I tried to be as gentle and polite as possible, but at the end of the day, it's never easy to decline something like that. I felt really bad about it, and the way that she reacted made me feel even more guilty. She made a really sad face and told me that she had been wanting to ask me about this for a really long time, ever since I mentioned how I reminded her of myself at the engagement party. She told me that she had seen a couple of my old wedding photos around the house, and she had loved the jewelry that I was wearing in it, and that comment that I had made is what gave her the idea. It was really heartwarming, and I almost agreed, but then I couldn't do that to Annie. She herself wouldn't mind it, but it was just not all right with me. I had been waiting for a long time to see my daughter in that jewelry, and I don't know, it would just feel really weird and off to see Fran sporting those jewels before Annie. It didn't mean that I liked Fran any less, but like I said already, my wedding jewelry is very close to my heart, and for sentimental reasons, I could not let Fran have them. So after that discussion, I had nothing more to say to her, and she left. I could tell that she was very disappointed because this did not play out the way that she had expected it to, but there was not much that I could do. Of course I felt guilty about it, and I still kind of do, which is probably why I'm even here right now. But then again, of course, I love my own daughter more than Fran, and I really don't think that I was in the wrong here. What I didn't expect was the kind of backlash that I have been receiving ever since then. After Fran left, I didn't think much of that interaction, and I certainly didn't expect it to blow out of proportion like this, but I guess she told Hank and he decided to take things into his own hands and tried to convince me to let her have the wedding jewelry. He came back home a couple of hours after Fran had left and immediately confronted me about the conversation that we had. I was very clear-cut with him, and I told him that I would prefer for Annie to wear that jewelry before anybody else, and I didn't think that there was anything wrong with it. But he told me that Annie was still young, and it could be years before she got married. I told him that that was not the issue. She could wear my jewelry for whichever occasion she deemed fit, and I would be okay with it. It didn't have to be a wedding, but it had to be Annie first, and that was a non-negotiable for me. I put my foot down because of the way that Hank had confronted me that day. I knew for a fact that he had every intention of turning this into a fight. And that's exactly what happened. When I told him that I would not allow Fran to borrow my wedding jewelry, he first tried to bargain with me and said that he would personally make sure that it was completely fine when it was returned to me, and would even compensate me otherwise. But I told him that that was not the problem here at all, and it was just for sentimental reasons that I wanted my own daughter to be able to wear my wedding jewelry first. That was it. There was nothing deeper than that. Then he started getting personal with me and said that the way I was behaving was utterly selfish, and he did not expect me to act this way with his daughter. He said that he had never played between Annie and Fran, so he didn't expect me to act this way either because it was unfair to Fran. I thought that was ridiculous because by the time we got together, both girls were grown-up adult women, and it was not like we were raising them anymore. So we couldn't have played even if we wanted to. It was just a moot point. I told him that he was being illogical and said that I didn't want to discuss this further, but that's when he completely lost his temper and started yelling at me. He accused me of trying to sabotage Fran's wedding on purpose because apparently I had never liked her and everybody knew about it. I genuinely had no idea what he was talking about. And the implication that I was trying to ruin Fran's wedding because I didn't like her is one that did not sit right with me because it made me sound like a terrible person. So I made it very clear to him that this had nothing to do with Fran and everything to do with me and Annie. I was only declining because I wanted Annie to wear my jewelry first. It was just that. I had no intention of ruining anybody's wedding or sabotaging anything. I also tried to tell Hank that I actually quite liked Fran, but I never got the same energy from her. I reminded him that it was always me who had been trying to talk to her and get to know her better in the past, but she was the one who never reciprocated it. If somebody doesn't even talk to me, there's not much that I can do to build a relationship with them. In spite of that, I liked her and would have loved to get to know her better. I thought that her coming over that day was an opportunity for us to bond and actually build a relationship, but she was just here for the jewelry, and it made everything seem very businesslike and insincere. But Hank was not ready to listen to even a word against Fran, although technically I was not even speaking against her. I was just telling him my side. To him, for some reason, it seemed like I was trying to shift the blame to her. I didn't even understand why they had to be a bad guy in this situation, since both of us had valid reasons and feelings. Fran wanted to wear the jewelry because she wanted to look her best for the wedding, and she liked the set that I had worn, and perhaps for personal reasons she did not want to buy it and wanted to borrow it from me. I was flattered that she had liked my jewelry so much, but I also had my restraints and I could not let her borrow it. I don't see anybody who is in the wrong here, and I think it was unfair of Hank to try and portray me as the villain. Also, his other accusations of me playing favorites and trying to sabotage Fran was simply just hurtful. After we were done arguing, he told me that I could either agree to lend my jewelry to Fran, or I could live with the knowledge that I was hurting this family just because of some petty notion that I had, that anybody else wearing my wedding jewelry before Annie would cheapen it somehow. And then he walked away from the conversation. We haven't spoken since then. As I said, this is the first time that this has happened. Hank and I, like any other couple, have had arguments before, but none of this magnitude. They have always been about petty small things, but this seems like a big deal, and the fact that he's not even willing to talk to me about it and discuss things with me is what hurts. He won't even look at me, and I don't even know what to say to him at this point. I have also not spoken to Fran about this, but I highly doubt that she will be able to make him see sense either, since he was pissed off the day that we had our argument. I already told you guys how Hank had always been very respectful of the fact that I had been married before, and I had a child as well. But after that argument, I started feeling like he was kind of holding it against me and trying to make me feel bad for putting my daughter above his daughter. I just don't understand the sudden change in his behavior, because he had always known that my first family would always be more important to me. So, of course, I would prioritize Annie over Fran. Besides, it wasn't like I had watched Fran grow up or whatever, so I didn't even feel that bad saying no to her. I just need Hank to understand that this is not a comment on my relationship with him. Just a personal issue that I don't think is such a big deal. But I don't know how to explain it to him without arguing with him again, and I don't know if I have the energy for that. He and I have not been speaking to each other for a couple of days, and I just don't know what to say to him. I have spoken to Annie about this, and she told me that she was fine with somebody else wearing the wedding jewelry. But it wasn't about her. It was about the principle of the thing. The way Hank has been treating me since after the fight, it makes me feel like a total jerk. And I really want to make things right with him, but I also do not have any interest in lending my jewelry to Fran. I don't understand if I'm being petty or not, because I'm seriously beginning to question if I was ever in the right here, just because of how I'm being treated for saying no to something that I thought was completely reasonable. AITA for saying no to my stepdaughter when she asked me for my wedding jewelry because I wanted my own daughter to wear them first. Update 1. Hello. I would just like to take the time out to thank everybody first who commented on my post. Good or bad, anybody who had anything to say about my situation, thank you for commenting, and it was all really helpful. Anyway, coming back to what happened. It's been about a week and a half since our argument, and we haven't been speaking. As I said, it had been a really difficult time for us, and I was not dealing with it well. 2 days ago, I finally broke down and decided that I was going to talk to Hank, because not talking to each other was not going to lead anywhere. The fight would never get resolved if we continued to give each other the cold shoulder and turned it into an ego clash. I was right, and he thought that he was right, but there had to be some common ground, and we had to come to a conclusion about this because otherwise we would never be able to work things out. So I sat him down the other day and I decided to tell him everything that was weighing on my mind. I told him that I was afraid that I was going to lose him because of this fight, and that's the last thing I would ever want. When I said that, he seemed to melt a little, and we ended up hugging at that point because it was pretty clear that both of us had really missed each other, and we didn't want to continue fighting. After hugging, he told me that he had realized that Fran was being really entitled by demanding that I let her have the wedding jewelry, especially because that was really special to me, and it held a lot of sentimental value. He told me that he had realized it was wrong of him to put me in a difficult position and kind of make me choose between Fran and Annie. Even if it was not directly going to impact anything, it was still not cool. And he said that he was apologetic for it. I accepted his apology and said that I might have been a little annoying to deal with at that time as well, because I was just sticking to one thing without even bothering to explain my reasoning behind it calmly and adequately. I told him that the wedding jewelry was special to me because I had picked it out specifically because I knew that my late husband would appreciate it. It held a lot of meaning to me, and if somebody had to wear it after me, it just had to be Annie. I told him that I could get an identical set made for Fran, and that could be my wedding gift to her, and he seemed to be okay with that. Both of us apologized to each other, and everything is better again. Update 2. So it's been 2 days since I posted here, and like I said, Hank and I had decided that I was going to have an identical set of wedding jewelry custom made for Fran, and that would be my wedding gift to her. Mind you, that would be a lot more expensive than just letting her have my jewelry. I thought she was going to appreciate it, but instead, she flipped out at us and said that we were being really crazy. She came over this evening, and my husband had been the one to invite her home so we could talk it out and clear the air between us. I explained to her that there was a lot of sentimental reasons why I couldn't let her have my original jewelry, but I would be more than happy to have a duplicate made for her specifically. In fact, I'm still in touch with my friend who designed my jewelry, and I could just get her to do another one. And I know that she would be more than happy to do it for me. So if Fran really wanted to wear the kind of jewelry that I wore for my wedding, I would be the one to arrange it for her. I thought she would be happy when she heard that, but she started sulking and saying that it was not what she wanted. She told me that she wanted the rustic and kind of traditional feeling that one had when they wore old jewelry. I don't know exactly what she meant by that, but I told her that it would be the same visually. She then started making faces, and that she couldn't believe that I was treating her like this. Just like Hank had accused me of playing favorites during our fight, she said the same thing, and suddenly I realized that that's where Hank must have heard it from. Fran planted that ridiculous idea in his head because it was very unlikely that suddenly he just woke up one day and decided to pit our daughters against each other and make it seem like a competition. I didn't say anything about it at the time because I didn't want to accuse her of anything, but I knew for a fact that Fran was trying to manipulate the situation and make it work in her favor just so she could wear my jewelry. I thought that it was kind of crazy, but I kept my opinions to myself. I thought that she was being a little too obsessive over something like jewelry because trying to manipulate your father is just taking things too far. However, she did not keep her opinions to herself and made sure that she told me exactly what she thought of me. We made it clear that she would not be borrowing my jewelry. She got really mad at me and stood up and started screaming at me. She told me that she had always known that I didn't like her. Yet another thing that I'm sure she must have said to her father the other day, and he repeated it to me during the argument. I don't blame him. Honestly, Hank is a relatively straightforward guy, so he probably didn't even realize that he was being manipulated. Anyway, at least now we know where it was all coming from. She went on to say a lot of things about me, mostly about how I was trying to sabotage her wedding. And I was just jealous that she was getting married, but my daughter had no prospects yet. She claimed that apparently I had always been insecure because she was clearly superior to Annie, and both of us could never compete, which is why we were ganging up against her and refusing to let her have just one thing she wanted for her wedding and gatekeeping it for no reason. She then moved on to Hank and said that she was really disappointed that he had allowed himself to be manipulated by me. But I guess Hank had had that realization that Fran had been the one to put all those ridiculous ideas in his head in the first place, which is what led to our first argument. And why he didn't say much about it, he was very cold towards Fran and said that he knew who had been doing the manipulating. And she went on screaming at us for a while, but we didn't respond. And after that, she went away crying. I mean, it's her loss because she could have had exactly the kind of jewelry that she wanted, but she had to turn it into something bigger than it was, and that's all on her. Anyway, at least Hank and I worked things out and we were doing fine, so that's nice. We tried to fix the situation with Fran, but it didn't play out the way we had been expecting it to, and that's fine as well. It was just not in our control, and she was expecting way too much from somebody whom she had never bothered to build a relationship with or even be nice to. Update 3. Hi everyone. So it's been about a week since our fight with Fran, and she hasn't been on speaking terms with any of us. It's really surprising that she's not even speaking to Hank anymore because they have always been close. I can tell that he's upset. But we had a discussion about the fight that we had, and he admitted that most of the things that we had said during our argument were things that Fran had put into his head. And he was just upset that she was upset, which is why things got out of control, and he was sorry about it. But he had realized that Fran had manipulated him, and he was not going to talk to her until she apologized for making things so difficult unnecessarily. We don't know whether that apology is going to come or not, but until then, Fran's brother is also on our side on this, so if she wants anybody from her family at all to be attending her wedding, she'll have to apologize at some point. I know that I won't be invited, but I honestly don't care. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.